The $16 trillion lie, why America's water will run out in 10 years. The pumps were already whining when the breaker tripped. In a Texas panhandle county, 2 center pivots slowed to a crawl, then stopped. 40 miles west of Las Vegas, Lake Mead's turbines throttled back as the elevation slipped. 1,000 miles east, a small Michigan town posted a boil order after a storm turned its intake brown. 3 alarms, same hour. On paper, they're separate crises. In real life, they share one clock. 10 years. That's the window before quiet failures redraw the map. Who's still pricing a nation's water on yesterday's weather, and why are we letting them? To see the collapse, follow the first seam that split. 1 crisis, 3 fronts. We liked a simple story. Water problems are local. A dry well is a farmer's bad luck. A shortage on the Colorado is a Western fight. A Great Lakes dispute is a Midwest legal quirk. The lie works because maps are neat. The system underneath is. 3 pillars hold up modern America's water economy: the Ogallala Aquifer under the High Plains, the Colorado River in the Southwest, and the Great Lakes in the Midwest. Each was built into a balance sheet. Together, they underwrote how America grew. Financialized geography sounds abstract until you buy a house, run a plant, or borrow for seed. Land values on the plains assume wells hold. Phoenix's growth assumes the Colorado's paper promises convert into water at the tap. The Midwest's industrial corridor assumes the lakes are a steady shield and a highway. Mortgages, municipal bonds, hydropower contracts, cooling permits, crop insurance guarantees, they all lean on stable water. We didn't insure the water. We ensured the belief it would behave like the past. Look at scale. The Colorado serves nearly 40 million people and millions of farmed acres. Even in normal years, the lower basin consumes more than flows in, a structural deficit of roughly 1.2 to 1.5 million acre-feet a year, worsened by about 1.3 million acre-feet of evaporation and system losses. Bathtub rings on Mead and Powell don't lie. Tier 1 shortage conditions continue, with post rules still contested. The Ogallala supports about 30% of U.S. irrigated water. In western Kansas and the Texas Panhandle, declines measure in feet, not inches. 2024 monitoring showed broad drawdowns near a foot. Wells that blasted 600 gallons a minute now cough at 80, then fail. The Great Lakes anchor a $6 trillion economy. Ports, steel, refineries, and power plants rely on cold, abundant water, even as warmer, heavier rains and algal blooms push plants into costly dosing and boil advisories. So what synchronizes them? Heat taxes everything. A June dome spikes crop stress, pushing Ogallala pumping and rural feeders to their limits. The same heat accelerates evaporative loss on the Colorado just as cities need peak power for cooling, while hydropower dips when intakes flirt with limits. Farther east, intense storms turn tiles into conveyor belts, sending nitrate and sediment into intakes. Utilities pay to catch what bare fields flushed. Budgets run thin. Physics sets the hour. Policy carved brittle shortcuts. The Colorado was overallocated in law long before climate shaved flows, locking in deliveries reality can't meet without draining storage. In the plains, use it or lose it, cultures and yield-backed finance nudged pumping and thirsty crop choices even as recharge lags by centuries. Around the Great Lakes, the compact promised a closed basin, but wrote straddling community and bottled product clauses. Enforcement reads tough. Jobs and politics lean on definitions. Waukesha's approval under a straddling county provision set a tight precedent with return flow strings and still showed the shield has seams. Here are the receipts. Kansas logs 5 straight years of broad declines. Parts of southwest Kansas have only decades left at current extraction. Federal reviews confirm lower basin cuts and evaporation accounting debates, while post-2026 negotiations pit priority-based and pro-rata visions. On the lakes, bottled water under 5.7 gallons leaves legally as product, with no return flow. Municipal plants face turbidity spikes after spring deluges. Summer heat pushes discharge variances for power stations to avoid fish kills. The hidden balance sheet shows up where you don't expect it. Power grids groan when pivots and air conditioners surge together. Bonds wobble when treatment upgrades outpace budgets. Food prices jump when fallowing on the river meets failed wells on the plains the same summer. Industrial uptime slips when intakes run hot or green. The nodes don't share borders, they share timing. Synchronization risk is the new drought. Early melt shifts peaks before canals open. Monsoon misses stack heat and demand. Spring storms hammer bare fields, loading lakes for July blooms. In the same July, a farmer leans harder on an aging aquifer to beat leaf curl, a dam operator trims hydropower to protect turbines, and a plant manager on Lake Erie watches a thermometer like a fuse. Different choices, same hour, shared consequences. Numbers don't blade, people do. A kitchen feels it first, in a rate hike to pay for alum and filters, in a power bill after midnight pumping, in a grocery aisle when lettuce thins because downstream allocations tightened. We framed 3 local problems and sold them separately. They were one exposure all along. We ignored the clock. Wells age out. Compacts reset in 2026. Heat baselines step up. 10 years sounds roomy until you count harvests, budget cycles, construction lead times. That's 3 elections, 2 farm bills, 1 round of river rules. The window for quiet fixes is that small. To see how a nation's water runs out on schedule, start with the savings account we didn't replenish. While the pumps slow, the river of the West runs on paper, and the Northern Shield holds only if its seams do. The human stake, kitchens, wells, and bills. The first alarm in a house isn't a siren. It's a number that no longer fits the month. In the high plains, Lewis learned the sound a well makes when it's older than the deed. In May, the gauge read 240 gallons a minute. By July, it read 90 and kept slipping. The heat dome didn't blink. Corn leaves cupped at noon. He started pivots at midnight, split sets, shaved passes with low-energy nozzles, and still watched tassels tip toward failure. The power bill doubled in 6 weeks. He and Anna moved cash from the school clothes envelope to keep the meter spinning. Twice, the screen sanded in, and he pulled pipe with a neighbor who didn't ask for gas money. By September, the corn chopped for silage barely covered diesel. His banker talked about right-sizing acres like he wasn't talking about land with his father's boot prints. Their oldest asked if the bus route would still drive past their mailbox next year. Lewis looked at the gauge instead of answering. While that was happening in Phoenix, Tasha walked out of a 12-hour shift into 111 degrees at 8 p.m. The heat wrapped her like a second set of scrubs. The apartment bulletin board had a new paper tacked crooked, water surcharge extended. Inside the hospital, they'd bagged ice on foreheads, run cold saline, and watched monitors climb anyway. A grandmother whispered that she'd skipped running the AC to save money. Her grandson translated and stared at the floor. On the loop, Tasha passed a cooling tower, exhaling above a warehouse that had ribbon cut last spring. The city's warning about outdoor watering hit phones at the same hour. A utility text begged for conservation to avoid rolling outages. She bumped the thermostat a degree, filled ice trays, and put a cooler in her trunk in case the car died at a light with no shade. 1,000 miles east, Mark watched a line of radar crawl toward Lake Erie and knew the intake would turn the color of tea by morning. The storm hit bare spring fields upstream, tiles ran like clear hoses carrying nitrates, and the plant's turbidity meter bounced. He dosed alum, slowed filters, and called the mayor to float a boil advisory phrased carefully to avoid panic. The budget meeting later that week listed coagulant overages, filter media replacement, and overtime. A rate hike was inevitable and unpopular. "We live next to a lake," someone would say. He'd nod and point at graphs that looked like heartbeats, storms in spikes, summers in plateaus of algae risk. When a July heat wave pushed intake temperatures close to limits, the industrial plant across the channel asked for a temporary variance on discharge. He signed because fish kills cost more. Micro-stories stack into one bill. In Yuma, a grower cut a late lettuce planting after allocation warnings. The lettuce aisle in a Midwestern grocery store printed a tiny apology card. In western Kansas, a school board delayed a roof repair when ag valuations softened after wells failed in a cluster. In Detroit, a steel mill throttled for a day because the river ran too warm to cool safely. A machinist lost winter overhaul work when fewer pumps came in scarred. A cafe closed on Mondays, not for lack of customers, but because the owner had to pick up a second shift at the county. Here's the tight knot. Lewis's crop insurance guaranteed revenue on thirsty corn more than on sorghum, the safer choice on the ground, penciled worse on paper. Tasha's city offered tax breaks for a chip fab that needs round-the-clock water and power. The promise of jobs arrived with a rate case. Mark enforced permits tuned to the letter. Upstream, bare slopes and tidy calendars pushed the cost downstream to his meter. Count the hours people lose. Lewis dozed in a truck between 2 a.m. pressure checks. Tasha slept with one eye on the power app. Mark recalculated coagulant feeds like he was stretching soup. None of them set the rules. All of them paid the timing. The origin of the lie: paper over water. To understand why 3 alarms ring in the same hour, go back to when we put water on paper and called the future settled. The optimism wasn't evil, it was tidy. Add up averages from a short record, sign them into law, and assume rivers, aquifers, and inland seas would behave like the years we liked best. Start in 1922. Negotiators split a river they barely measured. The Colorado River Compact carved 7.5 million acre-feet for the upper basin and 7.5 for the lower, with a later treaty promising 1.5 for Mexico. The ruler looked firm. The record wasn't. Wet decades hid the mismatch between paper and flow. Then heat shaved runoff, snow melted earlier, and the math broke. Meanwhile, the 1928 Boulder Canyon Project Act turned those promises into Hoover Dam, canals, and Section 5, contracts the Secretary would administer. Arizona v. California in the 196s crowned the Secretary Water Master, reaffirming that shortages could be apportioned by judgment within the law. It made the paper sovereign, even when the river said otherwise. We layered hope on hope. The 1968 Colorado River Basin Project Act authorized the Central Arizona Project, with an explicit caveat: in shortage, California's 4.4 comes first. The 2007 interim guidelines tried to coordinate Mead and Powell, tying cuts to elevations. The 2019 drought contingency plans added Tier 0, deeper reductions, and a target of 3,525 feet at Powell to protect hydropower. In 2024, a near-term SEIS stacked at least 3 million acre-feet of conservation before 2026. Still, the structural deficit, roughly 1.2 to 1.5 million acre-feet a year, persists, and about 1.3 million evaporates and seeps in the lower basin before anyone drinks it. We were precise about contracts and casual about losses. On the plains, we mistook capital for recharge. We turned the Ogallala into operating income. Rights rewarded use it or lose it, and finance rewarded yield history. A 230-bushel corn promised backed loans, a resilient 190 didn't. The fine print never said the southern high plains would refill on human time. Declines measured in feet per year didn't dent paper confidence until pumps coughed. By the time monitors showed a broad 2024 drop near a foot across Kansas's hardest-hit districts, the spreadsheets had already priced the past into tomorrow. Around the Great Lakes, we tried to hold the line with definitions. The 2008 Compact promised what's in the basin stays there, but wrote in straddling community and straddling county exceptions and treated water in containers under 5.7 gallons as a product, not a diversion. Waukesha, outside the hydrologic line but inside a straddling county, became the first approval, tight conditions, defined service area, mandatory return flow, proof the shield can hold and still flex. Bottled plants rolled legal pallets out the back anyway. Return flows didn't follow. Unanimity sounds like armor. Jobs can make hands shake. The post-war boom finished the mindset. Cheap energy, bigger machines, straightened fields, projects that moved mountains on paper. Soil became a medium, not a living sponge. Aquifers became lines of credit. Lakes became an industrial sink and source that would always give back what we took. Law froze yesterday's distribution. Markets amplified it. We told ourselves storage, insurance, and a few well-timed guidelines could cover the spread. What nobody wanted to say out loud: paperwork manages priority, it doesn't make water. Long-range operating criteria can schedule 8.23 million acre-feet downstream. A hot year can't deliver it. Lower basin accounting can ignore evaporation. The sun won't. Crop insurance can reward calendar speed. A sealed surface won't infiltrate. A compact can ban diversions. A product clause can walk through the door with a barcode. The origin of the lie is simple. We confused governance with guarantee and incentives with resilience. We priced land, growth, and comfort on hydrology that shifted a full rung hotter. Now the clauses show their edges, the exceptions find their moment, and the meter runs. To fix it, you don't torch the paper. You rewrite what it pays for, count losses, not just deliveries, reward capacity, not just output, anchor rules to physics that holds in a 110-degree week. The river, the aquifer, and the lakes never read our minutes. They grade them. Ogallala, mining the sponge. Stakes first. Out on the high plains, a well's heartbeat is gallons per minute. When that number slides, whole counties wobble. A 600-gallon roar that once cooled July corn now wheezes at 200, then 90, then nothing. In 2024, monitors logged broad declines near a foot across the hardest-hit districts of Kansas. In parts of the southern high plains, the timeline isn't centuries, it's decades left at current draw. Collateral follows capacity. A quarter with a strong well appraises like a bond. Across the section, a tired hole knocks 6 figures off the price. Tax bases thin, bus routes shorten, kids wave from different mailboxes. Action looks like efficiency until you zoom out. Pivots crawl at night under low-energy nozzles. Pressure is trimmed, droplet size tuned, wind drift clipped. Sensors wake phones at 2 a.m. to split sets and save tassels. Deficit irrigation hits critical stages, then backs off. Cotton and sorghum take acres where corn carried the note. Local water districts meter and fine some of them. It's smart, relentless, and still pulls the needle down because the sponge underfoot is shrinking. Here's where agronomy becomes water policy. Lose a point of organic matter, and you lose tens of thousands of gallons of storage per acre. That's a summer storm traded for diesel and kilowatts. Years of full-width tillage and bare months sealed the top few inches. The first half-inch of rain skitters to the ditch. Roots hit a tight layer and turn sideways, shallow, nervous. So the pivot starts earlier and runs longer. 2 fields tell the story without a speech. At noon, both are green underwater. By 5, one curls while the other holds. The second started with armor, residue left standing, and living roots through shoulder seasons. Aggregates formed, pores reopened, infiltration rose. That producer still irrigates, just slower at dawn, not midnight. Meanwhile, recharge doesn't run on human time. In much of the Ogallala's southern reaches, natural refill is measured in centuries. That's the sentence under every adaptation. Every saved inch buys a season or a year. Every wasted inch writes a date on a mailbox. The paradox is brutal. Insurance and finance reward yield history. A 230-bushel promise pencils cleaner than a resilient 190. Use it or lose it, whispers from a D. Pump now or risk paper value later. The system pays speed, it finds patience. Micro stories give it a face. 3 days earlier, a farmer walked a ragged shelter belt his grandfather planted in the 195s. Snow drifted deeper there all winter, melting slow into spring. Wheat rows held longer during a March blow. He'd cut 2 belts years back to run a wider bar. He didn't brag. He counted rings and minutes. A mile away, a split circle carried 5 years of covers. Beans slid into flattened rye. In June heat, that canopy stayed cooler. Irrigation started later. Power bills blinked a quieter number in August. The banker didn't cheer, the ledger did. Then came a 40-day dry stretch with record heat. Pivots ran non-stop. 24 wells failed mid-season in one county. Fields chopped for silage fetched pennies. A machinist lost winter overhaul work. A cafe closed Mondays. Fences leaned, not from wind, but from absent hands. The pump shed feels like the only stage. The audience is the whole town. This is the pivot point, literally. There's no purity test. It's a race to make biology and hardware play together faster than decline. Strip till instead of full width. Keep armor on. Seed diverse covers after small grains. Graze where it pays for seed and keeps roots alive. Drop hoses closer to leaves under low pressure. Tie irrigation schedules to moisture sensors and off-peak rates so the grid doesn't groan when ACs do. None of it refills an ancient aquifer. All of it slows the draw. Policy can stop tripping the runner. Crop insurance can shave premiums for documented residue and living roots, not just dates hit on a calendar spring that doesn't exist. Termination windows can flex to infiltration, not punish it. Appraisals can add a water security line, well capacity trend, allocation certainty, verified infiltration, so 2 similar acres stop pretending to be equal. Co-ops can post off-peak rates for irrigators, who can actually wait because fields hold. Skeptics ask for proof. It exists in quiet ledgers. Prevent plant claims dip where winter armor is common. Summer peaks flatten a hair on rural feeders where pivots spin fewer hours because soil stores more between passes. Chemical spends at town plants ease after upstream armor and buffers spread. These are small numbers that compound like interest. The hard truths don't move. Parts of southwest Kansas have only decades left at current extraction. Some circles won't be corn again. Not this price of diesel, not this recharge, not this aquifer curve. Retire the worst 5%, the thin sands that crisp by July, the saline flats that ghost yields to perennials and prairie strips. Shelter belts belong where the wind runs. They cost seconds, they buy seasons. In the end, the sound matters. A hum you can still hear when a kid steps onto the porch. Mining a fossil bank is a one-way story. Building a sponge is slow and boring, and the only lever left that turns. Colorado River, paper promises, empty pools. While the high plains listen for the hum of pumps, the West's river runs on paperwork. The Colorado's promise was inked in 1922, then refined by statutes, minutes, and court decrees. On good years, it felt like control. In hot years, the river answered with silence. 40 million people, 5.5 million irrigated acres, 2 giant reservoirs that once looked endless. Then bathtub rings climbed the canyon walls like receipts pinned where everyone could see them. Stakes sound technical until the lights flicker. Glen Canyon Dam's turbines feed millions across the upper basin. Hoover's power helps steady the lower. When Powell sags toward 3,490 feet, below which hydropower stops, Western Area Power reshuffles supply at the worst time. The same week casinos cool the strip, subdivisions cool bedrooms, and hospitals cool bodies that arrived from parking lots with core temperatures nobody wants to say out loud. Mead has its own line, 895 feet, dead pool. Below that, the big concrete gifts from the 20th century can't pass water by gravity to millions downstream. The numbers are precise, the fear is simple. Action moved to meeting rooms with no windows. After wet decades seduced the compact into optimism, the 1928 Boulder Canyon Project Act turned paper into Hoover and canals, and a 1963 Supreme Court decision crowned the Secretary of the Interior as Lower Basin Water Master. The 1968 Colorado River Basin Project Act authorized the Central Arizona Project with a caveat. In shortage, California's 4.4 million acre-feet gets priority. In 2007, Reclamation and the state set interim guidelines tying cuts to Lake Mead's elevation. In 2019, they overlaid drought contingency plans, adding Tier 0 and a 525-foot target at Powell to protect hydropower. By 2024, a near-term SEIS locked at least 3 million acre-feet of conservation before 2026. Each step bought time. None erased this sentence. The lower basin consumes more than flows in. Call it what it is, a structural deficit, about 1.2 to 1.5 million acre-feet in normal years, plus roughly 1.3 million more that vanishes to evaporation and seepage in the desert reach before anyone uses it. The accounting that matters often ignored those losses. The sun and sand did not. So while agencies debated which spreadsheet should carry the charge, priority-based or pro rata, Lake Mead's white ring kept rising. Tier 1 shortage conditions stayed in place. Post-2026 rules hung in the air like heat. Meanwhile, a heat dome pulled snow off the Rockies early. The hydrograph peaked before canals opened, then sagged when the lower basin needed it most. Reclamation's 24-month study set Powell's release at 7.48 million acre-feet one year and watched projections wobble the next. Downriver, cuts hit people with names. An irrigation district in Yuma signed another compensated fallowing block. Crews scrubbed equipment that wouldn't run this season. In Phoenix, a developer refreshed a water availability letter twice in a year. A tribe insisted on seats where decisions are made, not just acknowledgements in footnotes. Mexico took reductions under minute 323 and banked water in U.S. reservoirs for emergencies as agreed. Microstories expose the gears. A gate operator in Imperial traces a finger down a delivery sheet while wind throws dust off a bare field. He closes the wheel a notch, a radio crackles, a grower curses the sun. A Las Vegas manager approves an ad buy that pays people to take rebates instead of grass, again, and signs off on another effluent return, so every gallon reused legally earns a withdrawal back out of Mead. A Hoover unit trips offline under a hot breeze, a gas peaker spins up at a price nobody quotes in press releases. Casino thermostats nudge up a degree that nobody notices. The river notices. Proposals to solve it with imports flare and fade. Lines on maps arc fantasy pipes from the Mississippi or even the Great Lakes, ignoring head lift over mountains, friction losses, six-figure pumping loads, legal shields, and decades of politics. Desalination in Mexico paired with a swap up the river feels closer to real, expensive, finite, years away, but local. Still, the only water that matters before the next August is conservation you can meter now. Guess what changed behind the scenes? The lower basin finally put evaporative losses on the table. States submitted competing post-2026 plans, priority first versus shared pain, and reclamation laid out alternatives that cut deliveries based on combined Powell-Mead storage, sometimes pro rata, sometimes by priority, with ceilings that climb as reservoirs fall. Tribes pressed to avoid cuts to senior rights and to convert conserved water into real benefits at home. Everyone did math under the same ceiling fan. Impact travels as price, hydro dips, and utilities pay more to keep pumps on during heat. Cities replace lawns and regulate aesthetics. Farmers adjust rotations with checks that don't quite cover the math. Grocery shelves change in quiet waves when winter vegetables tighten. Apartment complexes tack water surcharge notices to cork boards. Casino floors run 1 degree warmer. The deficit doesn't announce itself, it bills. Then a week lands where Mead's surface flashes like a pan under clear desert sky. Demand sets a new record. Glen Canyon trims output to protect the plant. Reclamation issues another notice couched in careful phrases. Managers already know the taste of the numbers. A kid in a Phoenix kitchen opens the tap and fills a glass like nothing happened. That's the point and the problem. The river still runs. It just doesn't run like the paper said. Rewriting the promise means counting what the sun steals, conserving what you can prove, and sharing cuts in a way people can live with long enough to sign the next round. The West built a civilization on a river it believed it had measured. Now it has to live on the one it actually has. Great Lakes, the shield and the seams. While the High Plains listen for pumps and the Southwest argues over acre-feet, the Midwest points to a legal wall and sleeps a little easier. The Great Lakes Compact is the shield, 8 states aligned, 2 Canadian provinces in parallel, a promise etched into law that what's inside the basin stays there. But strength lives in joints. Under heat, politics, and money, joints move. Stakes are not abstract. A $6 trillion corridor of industry, ports, and power plants leans on inland seas that feel infinite until the day they don't. 1,000-foot ore carriers queue at the Soo, refineries breathe along the St. Clair-Detroit Strait, nuclear and gas stations sip cold water and send it back warm under strict permits. There is a visible single point of failure, the Poe Lockett Sault Ste. Marie, the only chamber big enough for the biggest Lakers. If it fails, blast furnaces idle and auto lines ripple within days. Downriver, municipal intakes thread storms and summer blooms. On hot weeks, a manager watches a thermometer as closely as a chemist watches microcystin thresholds. Action hides in language. The compact bans most diversions, then carves exceptions, straddling communities, straddling counties, and a public water supply purposes clause that sounds civic and leaves pressure points. Water in containers under 5.7 gallons is treated as product, not diversion. That's a truckload of shrink-wrapped legality rolling away from a cold spring with no return flow. Waukesha, Wisconsin, outside the hydrologic line but inside a straddling county, became the first test. Years of review ended in approval with tight conditions, defined service area, audited return flows to the watershed. The door didn't swing, it clicked. Still, a precedent stood. Loopholes, even small ones, learned to breathe under heat. Meanwhile, storms have changed the work. Heavier spring rains slam bare fields upstream, tiles run fast, and turbidity spikes hit at dawn. Plants dose alum and slow filters, issue cautious boil advisories, then face rooms of ratepayers pointing at a lake they can see and a bill they can't. Midsummer heat pushes intake temperatures toward limits. Power stations call for temporary variances on thermal discharge to avoid fish kills. Regulators sign because the alternative is worse. Freight schedules wobble as wind stacks water in locks and safety prevails over timetables. None of it breaks a headline far away. Together, it's a system running near the edge. Then the West runs dry and looks east on paper. Pipeline maps appear in op-eds, arrows arcing from Superior to Phoenix, selling national emergency like a password. Engineers sigh, head lift and friction do not. The compact shield looks solid until a mayor outside the basin hears 10,000 jobs, reads public water supply purposes, and wonders whether an industrial campus can wear a household mask. Unanimity among governors is a high bar until payrolls stand behind a ribbon. Bottled exemptions complicate the moral argument. You already export, critics say, pointing at pallets with barcodes. The basin answers with return flow math. The pallets keep leaving. Canada runs a mirror track with differences that matter. Ontario and Quebec ban bulk removals. The Boundary Waters Treaty adds a don't injure principle, and the International Joint Commission convenes sunlight and patience. First Nations and U.S. tribal nations make consent more than courtesy. Treaty rights predate states, and courts listen. That web can stop reckless moves and slow necessary fixes when weather throws new problems at old rules. The line on the map is not the line in the water. Micro-stories trace the seams. A tribal biologist on Superior kneels at a spawning bed and points to lampricide schedules, water levels, and shoreline hardening squeezing habitat. He sits on an advisory board and argues for constraints that outlast elections. In a Milwaukee suburb, a council member reading the Waukesha decision learns how return flows are measured and who pays when pipes crack. In a Cleveland control room, an operator toggles a gate during a downpour to keep combined sewer overflows from breaching a threshold. He knows the river will run brown. In southwest Michigan, trucks roll from a bottled plant near a cold spring. Local activists hold photos of creeks running thinner than permits predict. The company cites volumes that barely register against the lakes. Legally true, hydrologically zero. Incentives tilt odd directions. Penalties for violating compact rules look stiff until you stack them against $1 billion campus. Unanimity sounds like iron until one state faces layoffs and another counts groundbreakings. The more the basin approves thirsty growth at the edge under public supply, the weaker its leverage when the West asks for solidarity. Every exception you grant to yourself is a gift to someone else's argument. Here's what holds. Keep definitions tight, narrow service areas, genuine public uses, audited return flows. Treat product exemptions as policy debt to retire, not a business model to scale. Harden single points, the second PO lock, modernized intakes, heat away discharge limits with real contingency plans. Pay upstream for buffers, saturated edges, and winter armor so Mark's plant buys fewer chemicals, not bigger filters. Put tribal and First Nations co-governance where decisions happen, not in press lines. When storms run harder and summers run warmer, the shield can still work if the seams don't turn into doors. The coupling mechanism, soil, heat, and power. Follow one drop of water and you'll see the whole system. If the top 6 inches can catch it, everything downstream breathes. If that layer sheds it, every other piece works harder, louder, and more expensive. Start with soil as a battery. A healthy field, with residue on top and roots living through the shoulder seasons, holds tens of thousands of gallons more per acre for every 1% bump in organic matter. Aggregates knit, pores open, water sinks in under a minute. On a hot June afternoon, that stored water keeps the canopy a few degrees cooler, delaying stress and shaving irrigation hours. A degraded field, tilled bare, slakes and seals. The first half-inch skates off. The next half-inch calves. By evening, the pivot must run just to stand still. 1 acre becomes a line item on a co-op's summer peak. 10,000 acres become a heat alert to a grid manager. Meanwhile, heat pulls on rivers and reservoirs. In the southwest, dry wind strips water off the lower basin reaches, stealing roughly 1.3 million acre-feet a year before anyone drinks it. Lake Mead and Lake Powell sag. Hydropower dips just when the cities behind them need electricity to cool bedrooms and stabilize hospital corridors. Operators at dams throttle to protect turbines. Gas units spin up into the price spike. The air warms another fraction, and the loop tightens. Flip east, where heavy spring storms hit bare fields. Tiles hustle clear water, rich with nitrate, into ditches and then rivers. The slug arrives at a municipal intake. Turbidity jumps. Alum goes in. Filters slow. Bills grow. A month later, July sun warms a lake already loaded, and a green slick maps out on satellite like a bruise. A power station upriver asks for a thermal variance on discharge to avoid fish kills. Regulators sign. The plant's output trims anyway, tightening supply. Thousands of air conditioners hum. A town's water plant hums louder. Both meters spin on the same weather. The hinge that quiets this is boring and local. Armor left on the surface drops soil temperature and slows evaporation. Living roots leak sugars that microbes turn into glue, stitching crumbs that don't fall apart in the first storm. Deeper roots open channels that conduct water down and bring moisture up. The pivot starts later. The feeder line carries a flatter curve. The water plant faces fewer surges after ordinary rains. None of this fixes a river's over-allocation or refills a fossil aquifer. It just reduces how often everything else has to bail. Micro-stories prove it in decimals. A county road crew logged fewer emergency dredges after a cluster of farms upstream seeded rye and put saturated buffers at tile outlets. The crew's overtime fell. The conservation district bought a second crimp roller. A rural co-op measured a 2% shave on a blistering July peak, where growers tied irrigation to moisture sensors and off-peak rates. The discount only mattered because fields could store hours between passes. A hospital in Phoenix limped through a heat dome without rolling outages because hydropower held enough, and a demand response program paid a cold storage warehouse to idle compressors for minutes at a time. Boring numbers, survival numbers. Coordination turns fixes into policy. Utilities can post a truly lower off-peak rate for irrigators who verify residue and covers and let controllers skip sets during the afternoon spike. Water funds can pay for bioreactors and saturated buffers per treated pound of nitrate, not per foot of pipe, because the plant saves more on chemicals than the field spends on wood chips. River rules can count evaporation and seepage in the lower basin books, so conservation doesn't pour into a hole nobody admits. When accounting matches physics, reductions hurt less and last longer. Skeptics ask whether this scales. It already does in pieces. A watershed that bought upstream armor saw turbidity spikes soften after ordinary storms. Rates rose slower. A cluster of pivots that combined LEPA drops with covers started later and ran fewer hours in a heat wave. The line held. A basin that counted system losses in proposals found cuts that protected hydropower thresholds. Casinos nudged thermostats, and nobody noticed but the grid. The loop can break the other way just as fast. Bare Novembers become brown Marches. A warm storm runs off sealed slopes into swollen creeks, dumping silt where boats tie and filters breathe. July arrives 2 weeks early. Hydropower trims, gas climbs. Rates ping text into apartments where paper notices about water surcharges already hang. The same storm that loaded a lake nudges an intake. Alum goes up. Lines at a grocer's bottled water shelf grow. The price lands on kitchen tables, school budgets, and overtime sheets. Soil is a national water policy we refuse to admit we have. When it works, everything else gets easier. Fewer irrigation hours, flatter summer peaks, smaller chemical bills, cooler rivers, calmer negotiations. When it fails, pumps, dams, plants, and people pay at the same hour. The fix isn't mystical. Armor, roots, less disturbance, diversity, verification that pays for what holds rather than what hurries. Count the drop and the month fits again. Ignore it and the same weather taxes the aquifer, the river, the lake, the line, the meter, and the person standing in front of all of them. One system, one clock, one hinge in the top 6 inches deciding how hard the rest of the country has to work. The incentive web, how money writes the drought. Follow the cash and you'll find the ruts. Nobody set out to dry wells, thin rivers, or load intakes. People did their jobs inside rules that paid for speed, certainty, and output, then sent the cleanup bill to the next meter downstream. Start where risk gets priced, crop insurance. The backbone of farm finance stabilizes income and quietly leans on the throttle. Guarantees pegged to yield history. That makes a thirsty 230 bushel corn promise look safer on paper than a resilient 190 bushel rotation. Planting deadlines reward calendar speed, even if fields should have waited 2 days to dry. Termination dates for cover crops lock to zones, not infiltration, so armor gets rolled early the spring it's most needed. The form never says prefer water. The math does. Agents sell what pencils, producers chase what keeps the guarantee high. The soil pays for the certainty with sealed crusts and shallow roots. Commodity programs add their own gravity. Floors and counter-cyclical payments steady cash flow for a handful of crops. Corn and soy fit the bins, diverse rotations don't. A small grain plus a clover underseed lowers risk on the land and raises it on paper because the elevator posts fewer bids and lenders discount unfamiliar curves. The safety net catches bushels, not capacity. Where output buys coverage, practices that build sponge show up as opportunity cost. Suppliers meet those incentives with schedules that match the race. Prepay fertilizer in November, lock price and delivery, float interest to harvest. Trait stacks come with stepped discounts that rise with acres. Herbicide rebates kick in if you stay within a chemistry family. Conservation might cut one pass, but lose the rebate, and the spreadsheet scolds you for saving. Dealers aren't villains. They bridge cash gaps and tame logistics. The bundle, though, narrows options toward uniformity, speed, and bare windows. Finance amplifies the signal. Appraisals lean on comps that reflect yield and optimism, not infiltration. 2 fields, same soil series, different organic matter and water security, book as equals. Loan committees look at margin per acre and coverage levels. They don't see a moisture profile. Landlords chase top rent on annual leases. Tenants mind structure and fertility because 5-year gains can vanish at renewal. The lease says acres and harvest date, not residue cover or living roots. A culture built on clean rows and perfect photos in April punishes messy headlands that keep storms on the field. Downstream, municipal budgets pick up what upstream incentives shed. Tiles move clear water rich with nitrate after early nitrogen. Bare slopes carry phosphorus on silt during a May deluge. Water plants dose coagulant, replace filter media, run overtime, and post cautious boil advisories. Those line items ride onto ratepayers and bonds. A town that budgets for snow plows also budgets for dredging and alum because fields solved for calendar speed. The invoice travels by pipe. In deserts, growth packages replicate the pattern. Cities court factories with incentives, land prep, tax abatements, expedited permits, and rarely price continuous use water in the headline. Data centers and fabs promise jobs. Their cooling and cleaning loads run 24/7. The phrase public water supply purposes becomes a key to extend service lines across the basin map. The cost lands later as surcharges and tiered rates. The ribbon was cheaper than hydrology. On the Colorado, history became policy. Senior writes Trump juniors, first in time, first in line. Priority stabilizes contracts and freezes bad habits. Efficient latecomers take deeper cuts than early profligates because the law rewards arrival, not performance. Meanwhile, accounting ignored lower basin evaporation and seepage, about 1.3 million acre-feet a year, so conservation poured into a bucket with a hole. Programs built intentionally created surplus, and then watched half a city's worth vanish into air nobody booked. Micro-stories show how the web tightens. A Kansas agent warns a grower that delaying cover crop termination risks eligibility. He rolls early and watches a June storm stripe a slope. A Phoenix council approves a tax break for a warehouse with evaporative cooling on the same agenda as a Tier 1 shortage briefing. A lakefront mayor raises rates to fund an intake upgrade and faces a room pointing at blue water and red numbers. Each vote rational. Together, a synchronized invoice. There are flips that buy time without sermons. Tie insurance discounts to verified residue and winter cover, not calendars. Use satellite cover indices and spot check infiltration tests. Let lenders shave a quarter point on loans where practices cut loss ratios in weird years. Documentation simple enough to fit in a glove box. Ask appraisers to add a water security line. Well capacity trend, allocation certainty, infiltration score. Price industrial incentive packages with continuous use water honestly. Closed loop cooling, reuse minimums, and cut first, demand response agreements that actually trigger when the grid peaks. Move money upstream. Watershed funds can pay per treated pound of nitrate at tile outlets for bioreactors and saturated buffers. The plant manager's chemical bill falls, bonds stretch farther. Grain buyers can offer steady supply bonuses for rotations and post-harvest cover by October. The premium buys fewer panic trucks in wet Junes. Utilities can post true off-peak rates for irrigators who verify soil capacity and let controllers skip hottest hour sets. The co-op shaves peaks, the field saves inches. Count losses where they happen. Put lower basin evaporation and seepage in the ledger. Stop pretending bottled pallets are hydrologically invisible. Cap pumping in groundwater districts with local teeth and pair it with bridge checks for transitions, corn to sorghum, sorghum to grazing, shelter belts where wind runs. We already spend after disasters, spend a fraction before. The drought isn't written by weather alone. It's drafted by deadlines, rebates, guarantees, and bonds. Change what the money rewards and the map bends. Keep paying for speed and bare ground, and the clock we set will arrive on time. The Synchronized year, a national stress test. 3 days earlier, a seam ripped across the Midwest. A bright band on radar stitched Iowa to Ohio, then parked. By midnight, 3 inches fell on fields left bare for speed. Morning found water moving like glass, carrying silt in thin brown sheets. Upstream of Lake Erie, tiles ran clear and fast with nitrate, ditches foamed. At the shore plant, Mark's intake turned the color of tea. He doubled alum, slowed filters, and watched turbidity flirt with a number that flips a boil advisory. The mayor asked for a line he could say without panicking anyone. Mark circled qualifiers and hit send. While that was happening in Ohio, a heat dome settled over the plains like a lid. Lewis split his pivot into shorter sets, started before dawn, and tried to dodge the afternoon spike on the feeder. The gauge that read 240 gallons per minute in May now coughed at 90. Leaves cupped at noon. The co-op dispatcher watched irrigation clusters swell one line toward its thermal limit and shifted load down the road. A neighbor's well sanded in on a Tuesday. He called the feed yard about chopping corn for silage. The price didn't fix the math. The power bill already stood where August used to. Downriver, the desert hit its own hour. Snow had flashed early in the headwaters, so the Colorado's timing was wrong by weeks. Reclamation's 24-month study held Powell's release at 7.48 million acre-feet to protect thresholds. Mead's surface flashed like a stove under dry wind. Tier 1 shortage conditions stayed. Cities throttled outdoor watering and bought more turf rebates with money and patience. Another compensated fallowing block signed in Yuma reshuffled crews. A bi-national team in the Delta counted cottonwood seedlings in a restored reach and then returned to a meeting about cuts that didn't care about poetry. Unknown to them in Phoenix, Tasha stepped into 112 degrees at 9 p.m., the asphalt breathed heat back at her face. A utility alert begged for conservation to avoid rolling outages. She bumped the thermostat, filled ice trays, and put a cooler in the trunk in case the car died on the loop with no shade. In the ICU, they'd packed ice on foreheads, hung cold saline, and watched monitors climb. A notice on her building's bulletin board extended the water surcharge. Down the road, a cooling tower behind a new warehouse exhaled steam under floodlights. Lakeward, the storm's echo kept moving. Mark's intake thermometer crept up. The industrial plant across the channel requested a temporary variance on discharge. River temperatures couldn't carry more heat without punishing fish. He signed the form, adjusted feed pumps, and texted his crew to bring a second pot of coffee. Out on the lake, a green slick mapped out on satellite like a bruise. A freighter missed a slot at a lock where wind stacked water. A cement pour waited. A schedule slid. City Hall rehearsed a sentence that started confident and ended careful. In Kansas, a school board pulled roof repair from an agenda and moved bus route adjustment up a line. Ag valuations had softened where wells failed in clusters. At the co-op, a machinist flipped the sign to closed Mondays and wrote "Ask for winter work" on a note that felt like a dare. In a grocery aisle 2 states away, a tiny card in the lettuce case apologized for supply tightness. Nobody connected the card to a gate operator in Imperial closing a wheel under dust. The grid felt it as a pattern, not as drama. Hydropower trimmed in hot afternoons to protect turbines at Glen Canyon. Gas units filled the gap into a price spike. Rural feeders hummed as pivots and ACs surged together. Casinos nudged thermostats a degree nobody noticed. A cold storage warehouse idled compressors for 15 minutes because a demand-response ping paid enough to say yes. The loop was tight, the loop held. Micro moments kept tally. A county road crew found fewer emergency dredges on a watershed that bought upstream armor and 3 saturated buffers at tile outlets. A rural co-op shave, 2% on its nastiest afternoon, came from pivots that actually could wait because fields stored hours. Mark's chemical spend flattened by a line item nobody outside the plant would ever read. In Phoenix, 1 fewer rolling outage avoided a cascade nobody wanted to test. Autumn wrote it in quieter ink. Grain basis widened where barges slowed on silted channels. A bond prospectus added a footnote about unexpected water treatment overruns after spring storms. A tribe's seat at a negotiation turned from courtesy to arithmetic. Post-2026 proposals traded priority for pro rata in rooms where nobody raised their voice and everybody understood the stakes. 1 year, 1 map that never touched, 1 clock that did. A storm loaded a lake. A heat dome pulled on an aquifer. A river managed by minutes ran on a spreadsheet that had finally started counting losses. Kitchens paid in surcharges and receipts. Plants paid in alum and labor. Grids paid in peakers and shaved peaks. Fields paid in inches and hums. The country passed the stress test by narrowing margins, not by luck. Next year we'll ask the same questions. The only reason any answer gets easier is a field that holds more water, a contract that counts evaporation, a permit that fits the river's temperature, a district that caps pumping with teeth and bridge checks, and a culture that tolerates the drag that keeps the sponge intact. Without that, ordinary weather will keep feeling like an emergency that arrives in the same hour everywhere. The outliers, places that bend the curve. Under the noise, there are places that stopped waiting for perfect policy and paid for what worked. They didn't make speeches. They changed the scoreboard and let boring numbers do the talking. Start with a county that tied money to sponge. The Conservation District brought 2 local banks and the crop insurer into a school gym and offered a deal that fit on 1 page. If a farm showed post-harvest residue, verified winter cover, and an infiltration test that beat last year's stopwatch, renewal rates dropped a 1/4 point and premiums shaved a hair. The elevator tacked on a nickel in August for corn delivered off fields with covers ahead of beans. Proof was simple: satellite cover indices, timestamped photos, and 1 field day ring test each spring. Action looked ordinary. A grower mapped risk. A sand knob got a grazing mix. A slope got strip till and a prairie strip. A wet corner got a saturated buffer at the tile outlet. By year 3, storms disappeared into the profile. Prevent plant claims fell in those townships, the water plant's chemical spend flattened, and the road crew logged fewer emergency dredges after ordinary rains. No viral moment, just receipts. On the high plains, a groundwater district drew a hard cap everyone hated and kept. Meters clicked, fines stuck, neighbors enforced neighbors. They paired limits with bridge checks, grants to re-nozzle pivots with LEPA drops, stipends for replanting shelter belts on prevailing wind lines, and 3 years of transition payments for shifting fragile slices from corn to sorghum, cotton, or grazing. One producer split his circle, watered the most responsive quarters, let corners go to prairie, and seeded a winter mix he grazed in January. His wells still dropped. Slower, his August statement blinked a smaller number. The cafe stayed open Fridays. In the Midwest, a watershed fund paid by the pound. Utilities, counties, and a grain buyer pooled dollars and wrote checks for nitrate removed at tile outlets by bioreactors and saturated buffers, and for verified fall cover. The plant manager stopped pretending chemicals were cheaper. Within 2 seasons, turbidity spikes softened after ordinary storms. A boil advisory that used to flicker didn't. The rate case came anyway, smaller, duller, less angry. An industrial siting board wrote water into the offer. A battery plant got incentives only if cooling hit a reuse threshold and intake temps had a margin against heat waves. A data campus signed a cut-first demand response agreement that triggered on the year's worst afternoons and replaced evaporative systems with closed-loop chillers where they penciled. Permits moved because the design matched the basin's physics, not the brochure. Jobs arrived without pushing a water plant into crisis every July. Grain buyers changed procurement like they changed dryer settings. A mill that had trucked wheat across 3 states after a soaked June posted a resilience premium for growers within 120 miles who added a small grain plus clover and kept cover by October. Verification ran through satellite indices and a 1-page conservation plan. The year heat bent yields, they didn't run out. The elevator manager stopped answering midnight calls from dispatch. He answered a quiet spreadsheet. Leases stopped killing 5-year plans. A county attorney drafted an addendum landlords could drop into any contract, $2 more per acre for documented covers and reduced till permission for messy headlands, multi-year terms, and a clause reimbursing part of practice costs if the lease ended early. 10 landlords signed in a month. Tenants ceded without worrying the next handshake would erase the investment. A winter later, a March blow came and went. The road ditches stayed clearer. Micro-stories carried the change. A co-op rented a crimp roller and an interceder like it rented anhydrous bars. The schedule filled. A bank piloted a half-point discount for farms with verified residue and infiltration gains. Delinquency dipped in the drought pocket. A tribal council negotiated co-governance on shoreline restoration tied to strict limits on new withdrawals. Spawning beds thickened where elders pointed. A small energy co-op layered irrigation alerts onto demand response texts only for farms with covers, because only those fields could skip a set without a yield penalty. The peak shaved on the hottest afternoon. They didn't ignore transition pain. Year 1 is messy. They front-loaded help. Bridge payments that covered the dip, flexible termination windows tied to infiltration not dates, and verification you could keep in a glove box. They taught with stopwatches, not slogans. The county fair put infiltration tests next to the tractor pull. Kids cheered when water vanished. The pattern wasn't magic. Pay for capacity, not just output. Tie dollars to armor, roots, less disturbance, and documented savings at the meter. Count evaporative losses in ledgers so conserved water doesn't fall through a hole. Price continuous use water in incentives like a scarce input. Protect single points before they fail. The curve didn't bend because someone found a silver bullet. It bent because enough people got paid to do the slow work fast. The storms still came, the heat still pressed, the hum stayed audible longer, and in kitchens, the numbers started fitting the month again. The hard choices, friction that buys time. There's a list nobody loves because it steals speed. It also buys years. Start with the acres that bleed first. On most farms, the worst 5%, thin sands that crisp by July, side hills that sheet in every storm, saline patches that ghost yields, burns cash and structure together. Retire those strips to perennials. Pay real checks for deep-rooted covers, prairie ribbons across slope, and grazing lanes that turn nuisance acres into feed. The other 95% gets easier to defend when the bleeding edge stops bleeding. Put trees back where wind runs. Shelter belts aren't nostalgia, they're infrastructure. A line of trees costs seconds on a pass and returns snowpack that melts slow, shade that cools cattle and soil, and a break that keeps March from stealing April. Counties can fund a belt stipend out of saved road drifts and ditch cleanouts. Farm shops can mark prevailing winds and plant 3 belts in their teeth. Efficiency will grumble. July will thank you. Match crops to water, not memory. Circles riding weak wells shouldn't pretend to be corn forever. Shift to sorghum, cotton, or grazing rotations that roll with stress. Lenders can tie restructuring to crop water budgets with bridge payments for the first 3 seasons. The goal isn't purity, it's physiology aligned to a fossil account that won't refill on human time. In the same breath, stop losing water to the clock. Irrigation schedules belong with soil moisture sensors and off-peak rates that actually matter, not just a flyer. Co-ops can post a daytime price that bites and a night price that rewards fields capable of waiting. Tie the discount to verified residue and cover so the buffer exists. Fix the calendars that punish sponge. Crop insurance can keep farmers solvent and still stop rewarding speed for its own sake. Move from rigid termination dates to function, 2 simple marks, winter cover present and spring infiltration above a threshold, unlock flexibility. Agents can sell it if loss ratios fall. Growers will wear it if rules are clear and verification fits in a glove box. Pair that with micro bonuses for documented residue at planting. and you'll see fewer bare Aprils and fewer brown Marches. Handle nutrients with blunt tools that work. Tiles will keep fields plantable, make their outlets smarter. Install bioreactors and saturated buffers where the grade allows. Pay per treated pound of nitrate, not per foot of pipe. Shift a slice of nitrogen into in-season passes matched to crop need. Seed covers that drink leftovers. Watersheds can fund the hardware. Utilities will see the chemical bill fall and help refinance the fund. It's cheaper to catch nitrogen at a wood chip trench than at a plant's intake. Write leases that stop killing 5-year plans. Landlords can add 1 page, $2 more per acre for documented covers and reduced till permission for messy headlands, a 3-year term that outlasts the first ugly spring, and a clause reimbursing part of practice costs if the lease ends early. Tenants will cede with confidence, structure will recover, rent will hold. Industry must price water like a scarce input. Siting boards can tie incentives to closed-loop cooling, minimum reuse, and heat-aware design that doesn't shove intakes into thermal limits every July. Cut first demand response agreements need to trigger when the grid begs, not when it's convenient. Publish the water budget alongside jobs claimed. If the plan can't pass a 110-degree week on paper, it shouldn't pass in a room. On the river, stop pretending losses don't count. Put lower basin evaporation and seepage in the ledger so conservation doesn't pour into a hole. Make cuts predictable and visible enough to plan for priority where law requires, shared pain where physics demands. Protect minimum hydropower thresholds because they keep hospitals cool and neighborhoods safe when heat presses. For aquifers, caps need teeth and neighbors' names on them. Local boards can meter, fine, and pair limits with bridge checks, re-nozzle to LEPA drops, plant shelter belts on prevailing lines, and fund transitions from thirsty rotations to mixed systems that survive. Every saved inch buys time for the next decision. Every wasted inch writes a date nobody wants on a mailbox. In towns, buy upstream instead of bigger filters. Pool ratepayer funds with county dollars to pay for cover, buffers, and trenches that keep storms out of pipes. The water plant's budget will flatten. Bond council will smile a rare smile. Culture has to shift from clean to durable. Celebrate headlands that hold, not rows you could eat off. Put infiltration tests next to the tractor pull at the fair. Teach kids with stopwatches and jars, not posters. Normalize belts, strips, and messy spring fields as the tax you pay to keep your own month intact. None of this is glamorous. It's friction you feel on every pass, lifted planters at belts, slower mornings with residue, verification steps, longer rotations. But friction is policy that works when the map turns warmer. The next heat dome won't care about your schedule. The next storm won't respect your calendar. The ground will grade whether we chose speed or sponge. Choose drag that keeps water where it falls and power where it's needed. That's how you buy time. That's how you keep the hum audible for the kids stepping onto the porch. The hidden ledger, pricing the real risk. Start with a balance sheet that never shows up in bank software. Collateral isn't just acres and cap rates. It's topsoil depth, organic matter, infiltration, and a well's pressure curve over time. Strip the sponge and the number on an appraisal loosens like a fence post after spring floods. You can hit bushels this year and still get riskier. The ledger won't blink until a renewal meeting turns quiet. Here's what appraisals ignore and lenders feel later. 2 fields, same soil series and 5-year yield history book alike. One holds water, one sheds it. Under a heat dome, the shedder burns diesel and kilowatts to stay even. Costs creep, loss ratios inch up, and a borrower who's never missed a note becomes watch. Multiply by a county and land values bifurcate along invisible water lines. Tax receipts trail. A school trims a bus route. A clinic delays a chiller replacement. The feed store tightens credit by a week that matters. Insurance keeps its own quiet record. Prevent plant claims spike where residue is thin and calendars outrun infiltration. Replant calls follow crusted headlands. Drought indemnities arrive in clusters where wells coughed mid-season. Reserves swell, premiums drift, and the agent who wants to reward armor can't. Yet because the form pays for bushels lost, not bushels secured by sponge. The pool eats the mispricing until it can't. Municipal budgets carry a mirror exposure. When tiles run nitrate and storms lift phosphorus, plants pay for coagulant and filter media, blend sources, and put crews on overtime. Those costs ride on ratepayers and municipal bonds. Stormwater systems sized for yesterday now chase brown surges born on bare April slopes. A town that once budgeted for snow plows quietly budgets for dredging and alum. The invoice started in a field and arrived at a kitchen. Energy shows up on the same page. Pivots that run longer at night to dodge peaks still add load when heat domes flatten the curve. Hydropower slips when reservoirs sag. Thermal plants throttle when rivers warm. Utilities hedge with peakers and demand response, but rural feeders still hum when pumps and ACs surge together. Every irrigation hour actually avoided upstream is a kilowatt-hour not purchased at the worst price. No rate case says soil. The meter knows. Food volatility belongs in this ledger. Fallowed acres ripple into price bumps that don't look dramatic until they stack. Lettuce short after lower basin allocation cuts. Wheat basis wider when barges slow on silted rivers. Milk processors juggle intakes when heat stresses herds standing on wells that lost pressure. Groceries absorb the wobble. Households notice the month ending early. Industrial downtime hides here too. A steel mill throttles because the river's intake runs too warm to cool safely. A refinery slows a unit when flow fluctuations complicate towers. A chip fab pauses a line as a drought surcharge hits a municipal system. Those hours land in earnings calls as weather. They also read water mispriced. Migration sketches the same ledger in pencil. Families leaving where wells failed don't file forms titled Aquifer. They list jobs and schools. The tax base narrows. Main Street leans on fewer wallets. Real estate discounts risk with longer days on market. A banker in a brittle zip code writes smaller loans and shorter terms. A clinic struggles to staff nights because the waiting room empties in July. Now fix the math. Add a water security line to collateral. Well capacity and trend, allocation certainty, verified infiltration. Two similar acres stop pretending to be equal. Let lenders shave a quarter point for documented residue cover, winter armor, and infiltration gains backed by simple checks, satellite cover indices, one ring test at a field day, time-stamped photos. Tie loan covenants to function instead of calendar speed. Insurance can pay for capacity. Trim premiums where winter cover shows up on images, residue protects at planting, and infiltration beats a local threshold. Allow flexible termination, windows tied to function, so armor isn't punished the spring it's most needed. Agents will sell it if loss ratios fall. Growers will wear it if rules are clear and verification fits in a glove box. Municipal budgets can turn upstream. Watersheds fund bioreactors and saturated buffers per treated pound of nitrate and pay for verified fall cover where grades allow. Plant managers see chemical bills flatten after ordinary storms. Bonds fund armor, not just filters. Ratepayers meet smaller surcharges and fewer boil notices that flicker on Saturday mornings. Energy co-ops can buy avoided megawatts where avoided inches are real. Post true-off peak rates for irrigators who verify soil capacity and let controllers skip hottest hour sets. Tie the discount to covers so the buffer exists. Peakers spin less. Rural feeders carry flatter afternoons. Publish a real national exposure report. Food volatility, industrial downtime, heat and water compounding risk, and interregional migration are cost centers. Tie them to rainfall timing, aquifer trend, basin rules, and soil function metrics. Investors stop treating weather as trivia and start pricing resilience as yield protection. Microproofs already exist. A bank's half-point cut for fields with covers and reduced till soar delinquencies drop in drought pockets. An insurer's winter armor endorsement shaved prevent plant where satellites saw green. A water plant's quarterly spend flattened after upstream buffers and covers spread. A co-op's shaved peak bought a substation 2 summers. Price capacity, pay the sponge, count losses where they happen, then the month starts fitting again. The meaning, one system, one clock. Get this, those weren't 3 crises. They were one feedback loop with the slack burned out. Soil that can't hold a storm forces farmers to pump and towns to pay for filters. Pumping at night to dodge peak still hits the grid when heat flattens demand all day. Heat strips water off a river, drops hydropower, and nudges gas plants on exactly when air conditioners scream. One system, one clock. The hinge is boring and decisive. The top 6 inches. When the sponge works, a summer inch disappears into pore space, roots find moisture longer, pivots start later, and rural feeders carry a smaller curve. When it fails, the same inch sprints to a ditch, tiles carry nitrate, plants dose alum, meters spin, and fields call for hours of water the aquifer will never see again. Add heat and the loop tightens. Evaporation steals a lower basin city's worth of water annually, hydropower trims to protect turbines, and the grid pays more per kilowatt-hour to keep hospitals cool, while irrigators chase leaf temperatures with off-peak pumps that aren't off-peak anymore. The river teaches the same lesson. Paper can apportion 7.5 million acre-feet to each basin and promise 1.5 to Mexico. A hot headwater year won't deliver the average on schedule. Counting evaporative losses in ledgers doesn't refill Mead. It stops pretending conserved water falls into a hole. Priority can anchor contracts. Shared pain still has to exist where physics demands. Tribes hold senior rights and a seat that changes arithmetic, not courtesy. Post guidelines will either respect what the reservoirs can do together or watch bathtub rings write policy with no signatures. The lakes teach it with definitions. The compact can wall a basin, straddling community and product clauses pry at seams. Waukesha proved the shield can click without swinging. Bottled pallets proved legal volumes can still leave with zero return flow. The fix isn't a speech, it's practice, tight service areas, audited return flows, bulk removal bans with teeth, a second PO lock for the only size that feeds furnaces, and upstream armor that keeps intakes from drinking tea after a storm. Money is just the clock's voice. Crop insurance guarantees pegged to yield history push calendar speed that crusts the surface. Commodity floors pull rotations tight. Rebates reward passes conservation would skip. Appraisals ignore water security. Industrial packages underprice continuous use cooling. River accounting long ignored evaporation. All those lines tilt towards speed, uniformity, and bare months. The perfect recipe for synchronized failure under heat. When you change what dollars reward, residue and living roots verified by simple receipts. Off-peak rates that matter because fields can wait. Per pound payments for nitrate treated at tile outlets. Conservation that shows up in Lake Mead without disappearing to sun. The clock clicks back a few minutes in every room. Here's the uncomfortable truth that simplifies everything. None of this is about heroics. It's friction and verification. Armor steals seconds on every pass and buys seasons. Shelter belts lift planters and catch snow that melts slow. Bioreactors cost less than alum at intakes downstream. Counting losses keeps conservation from falling through a ledger. Caps at aquifers with neighbors' names on them turn a ghost map into a town that still has Friday nights. Tribes at the table keep promises honest. Definitions held firm keep a shield when national solutions arrive on stationery. And the payoffs don't show up as glory, they show up as absences. A boil notice that doesn't flicker after an ordinary storm. A pivot that starts at dawn, not midnight, and still ends the season with inches left. A rural feeder that doesn't trip on the hottest afternoon. A casino floor nobody notices is 1 degree warmer. A bond footnote that doesn't mention treatment overruns. A kid who still hears the hum. So the meaning is blunt and useful. We can't regulate scarcity with paperwork alone or grow out of physics with incentives that pay for speed. But we can line up the hinge and the ledger so the same weather stops taxing everything at once. Pay the sponge, count the losses, match permits and contracts to what water can do in a 110-degree week. Then a storm becomes a bank again, a heat wave becomes expensive instead of catastrophic, and a river managed by paper starts looking like a river managed by reality. One system, one clock. Every quiet fix buys time for the next decision. Every ignored inch writes the next map. That's the line that matters. Pay for capacity, count what vanishes, and the same weather stops billing every room at once. Want the field-tested playbook from towns already cutting risk in half? Watch the next story. Subscribe for more unglamorous fixes with receipts, and share this with the one person who signs checks when it rains.